and March, we ensure that final examinations are written in the following year. Those are the other talks that say, okay, what should happen if it happens that we get delayed going back to schools? And others are saying that, look, then what you may want to do is to cancel the spring school holidays and then also work all the way into December and start early the following year as well, so that we can catch up with time. Others are saying that probably you would have to have an 8 to 9 hour school day. But that is a bit tricky because we all know what the attention span and concentration of children is like. And so if you have an 8 to 9 hour day at a school, children may be exhausted. And so there are a whole lot of proposals that have come, and we are just placing them as scenarios. If then what, So we're placing it all like that. At the moment, we're all optimistic that we're going to go back. We're going to continue on level 4. In fact, proceed and graduate into level 3 so that we're able to move forward. But if we're unable to and we go back to level 5, those are the proposals.
Okay. Thank you for that. We have a question from Valencia. You can unmute yourself, Valencia, and ask your question.
Good day, everyone. I would really like to ask a question and maybe suggestion. From the lady that is from the basic education, what I think would be the best solution to everything that I have just mentioned, it's better for grade 12s and grade 7 to mainly focus on them in terms of education, as one of the learners mentioned that they are the ones that are going to the next level of education. And what harm would it make just from grade R up until grade 6 and then from grade 9 up until grade 11 for them to progress to the next grade? Because as much as we're still focusing on that, as long as there's no vaccine, nothing is going to change. As much as we can say we're going to level 3, the virus is still there. So what harm would it make in order for them to focus on that? And as a university graduate, why don't you implement for grade 12 and grade 7 a session whereby in a day they can attend only 3 subjects or 4? If we did that in university, simply it can be applied to those learners. Because one thing I am for sure, you're going to be held accountable should the disease or the virus be spread among learners, and there'll be a lot of death. So I think that is something that the government should look into and stop this thing of saying learners should go back to school. Even if you say the private school should open, what about the other children's rights that have to go to school? All the school needs to be closed, and the focus should be on the grade 7 and grade 12, and we can work forward up until we get a vaccine. Thank you.
Okay. In terms of, I think if you were listening to the minister's speech the other day when she was trying to clarify the phasing in of return of schools, she did clarify the issue around a progression of learners or mass progression of learners, where she was saying that, yes, progression is a possibility, but then again, you need to be progressed based on what you have written. What that means is that even if we are going to progress you, but you need to write, in terms of the policy, you need to write some kind of an assessment so that you can then be progressed, but you can't get out of bed and be progressed. You need to do something in between, which is an exam or some kind of an assessment that would then determine your progression to the next grade. So as much as we'd love to oversimplify it as saying that, okay, we'll progress the learners because anyway, they're still within the phase, because there's thinking like that even in the space at the moment. But in terms of policy, it won't allow us. We would have to do some kind of an assessment to do that. So it is a possibility, but there's a way of doing it. It's not an automated process. I think that covers.
And I think it's also important, like, to mention, and this again is why it's why we're having these discussions, because people are anxious, people are very scared, and we want to give them the correct information so that they're equipped and empowered to make informed decisions. And Leko had mentioned again, highlighting to the new evidence that's been found, is that young people are less at risk. We're not saying they are not at risk, but they are less at risk. And so what this evidence or research has found is that even when young people get the virus, they don't get very sick from it. And also they don't, it's quite difficult for them to transmit it from one person to another. And so it's also important that when we move on into these discussions, we understand the research and the facts around young people and getting infected, because I mean, one of the biggest things that is obviously of concern for young people and their parents is that I don't want my child to die of coronavirus. And we're not saying that this research says you're not going to die from coronavirus, but what it's saying is that from research and from past experience of other countries with the coronavirus and young people, they are less likely to be to get very sick from it. And so that kind of allows us the space to play around with ideas of how can we ensure that our young people still with full measures and safety precautions being taken into consideration, as Leko had mentioned. How do we empower young people to still go to school and get an education? Because if we have to wait until next year, we have to wait until we get a vaccine. What about the lives of children who are in school and whose education is also a right for them? So we have to also think about that. And so it's important for us to carry these facts when we move on into the discussions. We also have a question. Trevor also has a question. Trevor, please ask your question.
I actually have two questions from my side. Okay. The first one is that Leko said that children will not be sitting together in classrooms. And but what happens when and you also said that grade 12s and grade 7s will go back first. And but what happens when the other grades phase in, as we will not be sitting together in classes? But what happens when the other grades phase in? Then we'll be squashed. We're going back to the same classes we're in groups. So, like, what happens after that? And then my second question is that the headlines yesterday, they stated that the SAT will not allow its members to return to schools. But then, and you also said that the minister said no schools should be open if essential hygienic material have not been provided. But why hasn't these materials been provided? Why have not these materials been provided? Whereas schools are supposed to be open on the 1st. Will the schools be open on the 1st since processes are being delayed, since members are not back to schools? And it means the teachers will also be delayed, I guess, and will also be delayed. And it means the 1st of June mark we may not return to school at that time.
Okay, Trevor, I think you have three questions. One is around crowdedness when others return. So I think the assumption is that when the grade 12s and 7 come in, they will be spread towards other classes. But what happens when the other learners come in because they have to move out of their classroom? What happens to that structure, to the physical distancing? The second question is around teachers and the teachers union saying that they will not allow their staff members to go back to school to teach. So where will the teachers come from? And your last question is around safety measures, so safety and health and healthy equipment that is supposed to be, in an ideal world, supposed to be covered by all schools, and why hasn't it been provided to all schools to ensure that all schools are open at the same time and that learners all catch up at the same time? Am I correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Leko, you feel to...
Okay. So with regard to the return, the phase in return, we are anticipating that by the time other grades come back to school, the rate and the density of the virus would have decreased in our country. So we are hoping that as these learners, the first group of learners goes back and uses those classes, by the time the others come, at least would be like around the levels of 2 or 1 or whatever in the country. But as you will recall that in my initial input, I indicated that the whole question of social distancing of classrooms is only in South Africa. And when you compare to other countries have gone back in their classes as normal, but they've invested in ensuring that the personal protection equipment is up to standard and it is on point. So it doesn't really matter now whether you are the full class, as long as you are protected and you are sanitized, you are going to be safe. But we can't go against our own regulations, because our own regulations in South Africa speak of social distancing. So unless the World Health Organization advises us differently, we will for now maintain the whole principle of social distancing. We'll maintain that until we get a clarification from World Health Organization, which will then imply that our regulations need to be amended, and therefore the whole social distancing issue is no longer a problem for schools. We are hoping. So that is our hope, basically. So there are those two things that we're hoping, that the virus by then would have declined or would have flattened the curve, but also the World Health Organization would have advised differently on social distancing. Otherwise, if we are in this state by the time other classes have to be phased in, we'd have to think of a different approach and a different strategy altogether. So at the moment, we are in anticipation of the changes that may happen in the regulations that have been published so far. And with regard to the teacher unions, yes, I've also learned on media about teacher unions that are refusing to go back, and so forth and so forth. And we as a department are currently in negotiations with them to just ensure that we want to allay all fears that teachers may have around this. In fact, what we're saying is that currently all that we want is for school management teams to go back, so that school management teams can then be available to receive the distributed personal protection equipment. Otherwise, if teachers are not in those schools, how are those schools going to receive all the equipment that needs to be delivered? So we need the schools to open so that school management teams, at least, or those teachers that form part of the school management teams, are there, because those schools need to be cleaned. By cleaned, we mean now that they need to be biologically cleaned, because there's a difference between cleaning and biological cleaning. Because when you clean biologically, you are cleaning to get rid of the virus. So we need the schools to be cleaned in that fashion, and we need the staff to be delivered in those schools. But if your schools are closed and you are refusing to go back to school, who is going to receive those things? So what we appeal as a department to unions, we appeal to them to see this as an opportunity for us to work together rather than working against one another, so that we ensure
I think oh yes, we're back. Okay, we just lost you for a couple of seconds.
Hey,
Leko?
did I cover everything?
We lost you for a couple of seconds there, but I think it was towards the end. So I think you did cover most of Trevor's questions. And now I want us now to move on to, we had a question. Angela wanted to ask a question. Can you please unmute yourself, Angela, and so you can ask your question?
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear, Angela.
Okay, so I wanted to ask, so if things like get better and we all go back to school, let's say around in October, are we going to proceed to the next grade, or are we going to repeat?
So I think Leko did kind of answer a bit on that, but he can definitely go again. Leko, please reiterate what you had said earlier around the assessment to ensure that learners actually pass on merit.
Yeah, you're quite correct, Pakamila. I did mention that. I said that if we go back too late in the year, there is thinking that maybe the focus should be on curriculum coverage and catching up on the lost tuition. And then in terms of promoting learners to the next grade, there is going to be some kind of assessment that would have to be written first before they get promoted. But it is a possibility.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Angela. Evangeline had also had a question. Evangeline, please unmute yourself and then ask your question. And again, I know that we have a lot of questions on the chat, and I'm going to go through them. Please be patient with us. These are very good discussions, very good questions coming up, and they're bringing a lot of issues to the surface. And so please just be patient with us as we get through all the questions. Evangeline?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I have two questions. My first one is, how will school transport in rural areas work? How will that happen when they go to school? And my second one is, what will the precautions at school be? Like, what type of things will we use to wash our hands, or when we go into classrooms, what will we do, stuff like that? Mm-hmm.
Okay. You will recall that we were saying in the previous weeks that we are working with the Department of Transport to look at models and ways and means of making sure that there is due diligence in the use of scholar transport. And it appears that there is good practice that has been picked up from the public transport system, where before passengers aboard the vehicles, they get sanitized. And so there's also the regulation in this country right now that says that when you are in a public transport, or rather when you are on the public roads, you have to have your mask on. So I think those regulations are going to count for scholar transport, that before the learners board the vehicles, they have to be sanitized, and all the learners would have to have their masks on when they get on those transports. And also there is another addition that has now been added by the Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, where he was saying that before, not only should they as learners be sanitized and have their masks on, but before they board the vehicles, the vehicle itself would need to be sanitized before they come in. Every time when they go to school and when they come back, before they come in, the entire vehicle would have to be sanitized. And the second part of the question was, I'm sorry, I've lost my track now.
The second part of the question was, what will the precautions at school be like? What type of, what will schools without water do when the coronavirus, when schools actually reopen, their type of schools? What will they do?
Okay. Yeah, I remember now. Okay, so Pakamile, maybe what I will do is to send you the guideline document that we have prepared for schools, which we call Standard Operating Procedures for Schools during this time of COVID-19. It details everything in terms of what schools need to do in terms of sanitization, hand washing, even dealing with issues of emergencies at school and quarantining at schools and all of those things. And I think it's a very good document because it's not a secret document, it's a public document. I think it's a very good document to share with the members of this webinar so that they also go through it, they understand what it looks like. But what we've done was to also prepare a guideline document for schools to orientate learners when they go back to school, so that the detail that Evangeline is asking can then be expanded on those documents, and for schools to uphold the detail that is written in there. There's a whole long list of things there, Evangeline, and I think it would be nice for me after this call to share that with Phakamile, for Phakamile to distribute it to all, so that everybody understands what is in the orientation document for learners and educators, but also what is in the standard operating procedures for schools.
Thank you very much, Liko. That will be very helpful. And I've indicated on the chat, if you want to get hold of this document, please send me an email at paramilek@mma.org.za, and I'll be able to forward that document to you. Next, we have Blessing. Blessing, can you please ask your question?
Hello, guys, and hope you're good. My question is that how is the DBE planning to recover the lost time? And my other question is that if a school learner has already been infected with the coronavirus, how will the learner recover from the schoolwork? And my last question is that, do you think it is a good idea to reopen schools when the numbers of infected people are rising on a daily basis? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bless.
All right, that's all we have for you this afternoon. We'll have more for you, of course, tomorrow. It's a good afternoon from myself and the On Point team. SA Today coming up at the top of the hour. Do take care.